We look back at the golden age of Hollywood with a deep sense of nostalgia. It was a time of elegance, of perfect diction, and family values that seemed unbreakable. You see the dimpled smiles of Shirley Temple, the chaotic charm of Mickey Rooney, and the powerhouse voice of Judy Garland, and you think, simpler times. You think of a time when innocence was cherished. But if you peel back the celluloid, if you look past the blinding studio lights and the carefully crafted press releases, you find something rotting at the very core of the industry. For decades, the studios worked overtime to sell us the dream. But behind closed doors, a nightmare was unfolding. We aren't just talking about pushy stage moms trying to live vicariously through their kids, or fathers who are a little too strict. We are talking about architects of genuine trauma. We are talking about parents who saw their own flesh and blood not as children to be loved, but as livestock to be sold, modified, and harvested for cash. From the America's dad who ruled his house with a leather strap, to the mother who drugged her toddler to keep the paycheck coming, these stories expose the brutal price of fame. And the scariest part? These weren't isolated incidents. This was the industry standard. This was the cost of doing business. Buckle up. We're about to expose the 7 most ruthless, cruel, and disturbing parents in Hollywood history. We're digging into the details they tried to bury. And be warned, once you hear these stories, you will never look at these classic movies the same way again. Let's start with the story everyone thinks they know, but few truly understand the horrifying depth of. Judy Garland. To the world, she was Dorothy, the innocent girl from Kansas who just wanted to go home. But to her mother, Ethel Gum, Judy was a gold mine that needed to be kept open 24 hours a day, regardless of the cost to the mine itself. History has given Ethel a nickname that says it all. The real Wicked Witch of the West, and that name wasn't given to her by tabloids. It was whispered by the very studio staff who watched her operate. You see, Ethel didn't just push Judy into auditions. She fundamentally rewired her daughter's biology to serve the studio system. It started early. When Judy was signed to MGM at just 13 years old, the pressure was immense. The studio needed her thin, and they needed her energetic. In today's world, a parent would shield their child from that kind of body shaming. Ethel Gum leaned into it. When studio head Louis B. Mayer referred to Judy as his little hunchback or a fat little pig, Ethel didn't defend her daughter. She agreed with him. She put Judy on a starvation diet that consisted of chicken soup, black coffee, and 80 cigarettes a day to curb her appetite. But the control went deeper than food. When MGM doctors suggested a regimen of amphetamines to keep Judy's weight down and her energy up for 18-hour shoot days, Ethel didn't object. She became the enforcer. Imagine being a teenager, starving, exhausted, and your own mother is the one handing you the pep pills in the morning to wake you up and the barbiturates, sleeping pills, to knock you out at night. It was a chemical cycle designed to strip Judy of her autonomy. Ethel monitored the pill consumption like a prison warden. If she tried to resist, if she tried to just be a child, perhaps wanting to go to a friend's birthday party, Ethel would physically drag her out screaming, "Do you want a career or not?" But the abuse wasn't just chemical. It was financial and emotional. Ethel spent Judy's money as fast as it came in. By the time Judy reached adulthood, she found that the fortune she had generated, millions in today's dollars, had largely evaporated into her mother's personal indulgences. One contemporary at MGM put it ruthlessly. She didn't raise a daughter. She raised a product. Judy spent her entire adult life fighting the addictions her mother installed in her. She was a woman who could command a standing ovation from thousands, but couldn't get a good night's sleep without a handful of pills. And it all traces back to Ethel, the woman who sold her daughter's childhood for a chance at the spotlight. But if Ethel Gum was using chemistry to control her child, Our next parent preferred a much more hands-on approach. If you mention bad Hollywood mothers, one name rises above them all like a dark cloud: Joan Crawford. When the book Mommie, Dearest hit the shelves in 1978, it didn't just expose a bad parent, it shattered a legend. The public knew Joan Crawford as the poised, elegant queen of the screen. Her daughter, Christina, knew her as a terrifying, unpredictable force of nature who viewed her children as props for her own ego. We all know that "no wire hangers" line. It's been parodied to death in movies and drag shows. But strip away the campy movie version and think about the reality of that moment. A child woken from sleep, dragged out of bed in the middle of the night, and beaten because of the type of hanger in a closet. It speaks to a level of control that borders on psychosis. But the wire hangers were just the tip of the iceberg. Christina described a life lived in a minefield. Crawford allegedly employed night raids, inspections that would happen long after the lights went out. Imagine being a child, asleep in your bed, your one sanctuary. Suddenly, the lights blaze on. Your mother is there, eyes wild, inspecting the room for a speck of dust, checking your hygiene, examining your posture. If anything was out of place, the punishment was swift. Cold showers, beatings with hairbrushes, additional chores in the middle of the night, scrubbing floors until her hands were raw. It was psychological warfare designed to ensure Christina never felt safe, never felt ownership over her own space or body. Crawford's cruelty had a creative streak that makes it even more disturbing. There is the story of the rancid meat. If Christina refused to eat a meal, perhaps because it was undercooked or she wasn't hungry, Joan wouldn't throw it away. She would keep it. She would serve it for the next meal and the next. Even if the meat had gone bad, even if it was rancid, Christina was forced to sit at the table until she ate it. Then there was the Rose Garden incident. In a fit of rage, Joan reportedly hacked down her entire prize-winning rose garden with a pair of shears while the children watched in terror, a violent display of how easily she could destroy something she claimed to love. Another story involves a dress. Christina had received a beautiful dress as a gift from someone else. Crawford, in a twisted attempt to teach her not to be spoiled, allegedly forced Christina to wear that same dress every single day to school until it literally fell apart on her body. It was a public humiliation ritual designed to break the child's spirit. Now, it is true that since the book came out, defenders of Crawford and even some of her other children have tried to claim these stories were exaggerated. They claim Christina was difficult, that she wanted money. But the evidence suggests something much more malignant was happening in that house. Even in death, Crawford had to get the last word. Her will famously excluded Christina and her brother Christopher, stating, "It is my intention to make no provision herein for my son Christopher or my daughter Christina for reasons which are well known to them." It was a final legal slap in the face, a way to ensure the abuse continued from beyond the grave. But while Joan Crawford was terrorizing her daughter in private, our next parent was terrorizing his sons while singing about peace on earth to the rest of the world. Bing Crosby. The name alone conjures images of a warm pipe, a cozy sweater, and the soothing croon of White Christmas. He was the ultimate father figure for post-war America. He was calm, he was cool, and he projected an image of absolute stability. He was Father O'Malley, the kindly priest. But inside the Crosby home, there was no peace. There was only fear. In 1983, his son Gary dropped a bombshell memoir titled Going My Own Way. It painted a picture of a household run like a boot camp, commanded by a tyrant who cared more about obedience than love. Bing ran his house with a military strictness that bordered on sadistic. According to Gary, Bing Crosby instituted a regime of physical punishment that was startling in its brutality. There were weekly weigh-ins. If the Crosby boys had gained more than 2 pounds, they were beaten. And we aren't talking about a swat on the wrist. Gary wrote, "If we gained weight, we got beaten with a cane, a belt, or whatever was handy." These assaults left welts, they left bruises, and they left psychological scars that never healed. When the beating was over, Bing would often force the boys to pray, twisting his strict Catholic faith into a tool of suppression. Gary was given the nickname the Sentinel. He was forced to watch over his younger brothers and report their misbehavior. If they messed up and he didn't report it, he got beaten twice as hard. It was a brilliant, cruel strategy to turn the siblings against each other, destroying their trust. The most chilling aspect of the Crosby story is the duality. The public saw the Christmas specials. They saw Bing singing Silent Night with his boys smiling next to him. What they didn't see was the rehearsal. Gary revealed that minutes before the cameras rolled, Bing might be beating them for a mistake in the choreography or for looking bored. Then the director would yell "action" and the smiles would plaster on. They were terrified hostages in their own living room performing happiness to protect their father's brand. Rumors and reports suggest that Bing's need for control stemmed from his own rigid, almost military view of masculinity. He believed he was toughening them up, but instead, he was breaking them down. The tragedy of this parenting style is in the numbers. 2 of his sons, Lindsay and Dennis, would eventually take their own lives, a tragic statistic that many biographers link back to the emotional wasteland of their childhood. While some of the other brothers tried to downplay the abuse, claiming it was just discipline, Gary stood firm until his death. He wasn't trying to destroy his father's music. He was trying to survive his father's legacy. He showed us that the man singing about Silent Night created a life for his children that was anything but calm. But physical abuse is only one way to destroy a child. Sometimes the destruction comes from putting them in situations no child should ever witness. And that brings us to one of the most controversial rumors in Hollywood history. The story of Natalie Wood is tragic from beginning to end, and looming over it all is her mother, Maria Zakharenko. Maria was the ultimate stage mother, a woman whose obsession with fame bordered on the supernatural. She was a woman who believed in signs, omens, and the absolute necessity of stardom. Rumor has it, before Natalie was even born, a fortune teller told Maria that her daughter would be a great star, but would die in dark water. Most mothers would be terrified by that second part. Maria? She ignored the warning and fixated on the star part. She was willing to risk everything to make that prediction come true. From the age of 4, Natalie was dragged across Los Angeles, but Maria wasn't just teaching her to act, she was teaching her to seduce. Accounts from casting directors suggest that Maria specifically coached young Natalie to be flirtatious with grown men, producers, directors, the gatekeepers of power. One director noted, "She didn't protect her, she packaged her." The packaging was brutal. There are reports that when Natalie was just a child, she broke her wrist on set. A normal parent calls the ambulance. Maria, she allegedly told Natalie to hide the injury, force a bracelet over the swelling, and keep filming. She was terrified that a delay would mark Natalie as difficult or unprofessional. Natalie Wood reportedly acted through the pain of a broken bone because her mother feared the studio more than she feared for her daughter's health. Maria's cruelty could also be psychological. There's a story from the set of one of Natalie's early films where the director needed the child to cry. Natalie was a happy kid and couldn't summon the tears, so Maria reportedly grabbed a live butterfly, something Natalie loved, and tore its wings off right in front of her daughter's face. Natalie became hysterical. The director got his shot, and Maria got her paycheck. But the darkest chapter of this story involves a persistent, disturbing allegation that is circulated in Hollywood for decades. It concerns a meeting at the Chateau Marmont in 1955.
According to Natalie's sister Lana Wood and various biographies, Maria arranged for a teenage Natalie to meet with a very famous, very powerful actor. Rumors have long pointed to Kirk Douglas, though the details have been debated and denied by the Douglas camp. The purpose of the meeting was ostensibly for career advice. Lana claims that Natalie went into the hotel suite and returned hours later, disheveled, hysterical, and terrified. Something horrific had happened in that room. But here is the part that reveals the true darkness of Maria Zakharenko. When Natalie looked to her mother for comfort, for outrage, for protection, Maria's response was ice cold. She didn't call the police. She didn't scream. Allegedly, she told her daughter, "Suck it up. It could help your career." Let that sink in. A mother, faced with the potential assault of her teenage daughter, doing the mental math and deciding that the trauma was worth the networking opportunity. It is perhaps the single coldest moment in Hollywood parenting history. It set a precedent for Natalie's life, that her body and her boundaries were secondary to the demands of the industry. But while Maria was trading her daughter's safety for fame, our next set of parents were trading their daughter's tears for cash.
Shirley Temple, the curls, the dimples, the good ship lollipop. She is the symbol of innocent joy. She was the most famous child in the world. But the machinery behind that joy was anything but innocent. George and Gertrude Temple were hailed as the perfect parents. They were always on set, always smiling, always managing. But behind the scenes, they were managing a heist. Shirley Temple was the biggest box office draw in the world. She single-handedly saved 20th Century Fox from bankruptcy during the Great Depression. She generated millions of dollars, tens of millions in today's money. Merchandise, dolls, movies, she was an industry unto herself. But when she finally reached adulthood and gained access to her trust, she found nothing. Well, not nothing. She found about $44,000 out of over $3 million earned. Her father, George, had failed to place her earnings in a protected trust. Instead, he and Gertrude had spent it. They lived a lavish lifestyle, built a massive home, made bad investments, and treated Shirley's income as the family piggy bank. They hadn't just spent her money, they had spent her future. But the financial betrayal was only half the story. The emotional manipulation on set was equally disturbing. Shirley lived in a glass box. She was kept isolated from other children to prevent her from getting sick or hearing bad words. She grew up surrounded by adults who often treated her like a doll. Shirley recounted that strangers would walk up to her and pinch her hard, just to see if she was real. Her parents didn't stop them. They let the public consume her. On set, the manipulation was precise. Shirley was a professional, but she was also a toddler. Sometimes she couldn't cry on cue. In those moments, the studio, and allegedly her mother, knew exactly which buttons to push. There is a famous story where a director, frustrated that Shirley wasn't crying hard enough for a scene, took her aside and told her that her beloved dog had died. Shirley, heartbroken, burst into hysterical tears. The cameras rolled. They got the shot. And then only after the work was done was she told, "Oh, just kidding. The dog is fine." Her mother, Gertrude, was right there. She allowed this psychological torture because it got the shot. It kept the studio happy. It kept the checks clearing. They manipulated a child's deepest fears to extract a performance, proving that in the Temple household, the product was more important than the person. But at least Shirley Temple was safe physically. Our next parent decided that the best place for her daughter was in a house filled with apex predators.
This next story sounds like a fever dream, but it is entirely real and it is documented on film. We're talking about Tippi Hedren and her daughter, Melanie Griffith. Tippi Hedren, famous for being tortured by birds in Hitchcock's movie, apparently decided that wasn't enough. She and her husband, Noel Marshall, became obsessed with big cats, lions, tigers, panthers. But they didn't just want to visit them at the zoo. They wanted to live with them. They brought these animals into their home. At one point, they had over 150 untamed big cats living in their house in California. Fully grown lions roaming the living room, tigers sleeping in the kitchen, and right in the middle of this nature preserve was a teenage Melanie Griffith. It all culminated in the production of the movie Roar. It has been called the most dangerous movie ever made, and for good reason. There were no stunt doubles, there were no cages, just actors and untrained wild animals. During the filming, over 70 cast and crew members were injured, and Melanie was not spared. In one terrifying scene, a lion mauled her face. It wasn't a scratch, it was a mauling. She required 50 stitches and facial reconstruction surgery. She almost lost an eye. But the danger wasn't just on set, it was at home. Imagine being a teenager and your mother has created an environment where you have to sleep with one eye open because a 400-pound lion might decide to jump into your bed. Photos from that era show Melanie swimming with lions, the animal's jaws inches from her throat. She looks terrified, but her mother called it beautiful. The house was chaotic. It smelled. It was loud. It was a war zone. Tippi Hedren has since admitted that they were stupid beyond belief to do it, claiming they were brainwashed by their obsession. But that hindsight doesn't erase the scars, both physical and emotional, that Melanie Griffith had to carry. She grew up in a state of constant, primal fight or flight response. It was a childhood sacrificed on the altar of her parents' obsession, blurring the line between artistic freedom and child endangerment. But sometimes the scars aren't physical. Sometimes the scars come from not knowing who you really are.
We end with a story that is less about violence and more about a lie so profound, so deep that it stole a child's entire identity. The story of Loretta Young. Loretta Young was a devout Catholic and a Hollywood darling. She was the picture of purity. But in 1935, while filming The Call of the Wild, she had an affair with her co-star, Clark Gable. Gable was married. Young was unmarried. And then she got pregnant. In 1935, an illegitimate child would have ended her career instantly. It would have violated the morality clauses in her contract and destroyed her image. So, Loretta Young hatched a plan that sounds like the plot of a soap opera, but was devastatingly real. She went into hiding to give birth, claiming she had a mysterious illness. She birthed her daughter, Judith, in secret. Then, she put Judith in an orphanage. Months later, she returned to that orphanage and adopted her own biological child. She even hired a nurse to pretend to help her choose the baby. She raised Judith as her adopted daughter. She looked her child in the face every single day and lied to her about who she was. But the deception didn't stop at words. As Judith grew older, she started to look like her father. Specifically, she had Clark Gable's distinctive large ears. Loretta Young was terrified that people would notice the resemblance and figure out the secret. So, what did she do? She didn't tell the truth. She didn't embrace her daughter's heritage. Instead, she arranged for Judith, a small child, to undergo painful cosmetic surgery to pin her ears back. She surgically altered her child's face to protect her own reputation. Judith lived decades of her life feeling like a stranger in her own family, sensing a connection she couldn't name, constantly being gaslit by the woman she called Mom. Judith later said she always felt wrong, like she didn't fit, and her mother would just smile and lie. It wasn't until Judith was an adult, with a child of her own, that she finally uncovered the truth. When she confronted Loretta, her mother's defense was focused on her own sin, her own image, her own religion. Even darker, later evidence suggests the encounter with Gable may not have been consensual, that it might have been date rape. But rather than protect her child or seek justice, Loretta hid the child to hide the shame.
The trauma inflicted on Judith, the identity crisis, the surgery, the abandonment, was secondary to Loretta's need to be seen as a saint. It is the ultimate act of Hollywood hypocrisy. A mother who would rather carve up her daughter's ears than tarnish her own halo.
As we look back at these 7 stories, a pattern emerges. These weren't just bad parents who made mistakes. They were people who had been swallowed whole by the Hollywood machine, and they dragged their children into the gears with them. From Ethel Gum's pills to Joan Crawford's wire hangers, from Bing Crosby's leather strap to Loretta Young's surgical lies, these children were viewed as extensions of their parents' egos. They were assets. They were props. They were everything except what they needed to be. Children. They survived the studios, they survived the critics, and they survived the fame. But the tragedy is, they couldn't survive their own homes. And while the golden age is over, the question remains, has anything really changed? Or has the abuse just moved from the studio lot to the TikTok screen? So the next time you watch The Wizard of Oz or White Christmas, remember the shadow behind the light. Remember that for every moment of movie magic, there was a child paying the price. Thanks for watching. If you want us to dive deeper into any of these stories, specifically the dark truth about the studio fixers, let us know in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we'll see you in the next one.